The wind came down from the mountains like something with teeth. Savannah Hale stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching the snow blow sideways across the clearing, and tried to remember what it felt like not to be cold. Not just cold in her bones, that was normal now, 3 months into the Montana winter of 1882, but cold in the place where hope was supposed to live. That was the part that scared her, the part she couldn't let her siblings see. Behind her, in the cabin's single room, 12-year-old Michael was trying to get the fire going again with damp wood that smoked more than it burned. 9-year-old Clara sat on the edge of the bed they all shared, wrapped in every blanket they owned, coughing. And little James, just 6, was crying quietly in the corner because he was hungry and there wasn't anything left to give him except the last quarter of a potato and some flour mixed with water. Savannah closed the door and leaned against it. The hinges were loose. Everything was loose. The whole cabin felt like it was held together with frozen mud and wishful thinking. "Mike, let me," she said, crossing to the fireplace. "I can do it," he snapped, not looking at her. She knelt beside him anyway. His hands were shaking. From cold or frustration, she couldn't tell. Probably both. She took the flint from him gently and struck it 3 times before a spark caught. The kindling smoked, then flickered, then finally gave them a flame that looked almost cheerful if you squinted. "See?" she said. "Just needed a woman's touch." Michael didn't smile. He hadn't smiled much since they buried their father in October, 2 months after their mother went into the ground. Influenza had come through the valley like a scythe through wheat, and it had taken half the homesteaders with it. The other half had packed up and left before winter set in. The Hales had stayed, because leaving meant giving up the 160 acres their parents had died trying to prove up, because their father had always said a Hale didn't run, because Savannah had 3 kids depending on her and nowhere else to go. She stood and brushed the soot off her hands. Her dress was patched in so many places it was hard to remember what the original fabric looked like. Her boots had holes in them. Her hands were raw and cracked from hauling water and splitting wood and trying to do the work of 2 grown men and failing every single day. "Savannah?" Clara's voice was small. "I'm really cold." "I know, honey. Come closer to the fire." Clara slid off the bed and shuffled over, trailing blankets like a queen's train. Savannah pulled her close and rubbed her thin arms. The cough had been getting worse. They needed medicine. They needed a lot of things. But medicine cost money, and money was something they hadn't seen since before their father died. James stopped crying and came over too, pressing against Savannah's side. She wrapped an arm around him and felt how bony he'd gotten. They were all getting bony. The winter stores her parents had put up were gone. The hunting had been terrible. They were down to flour, a little salt, and whatever game Mike could trap, which wasn't much because he was 12 and small for his age, and the traps kept getting raided by something bigger and meaner than him. "Tell us a story," James said. "Not now, Jamie. Please? The one about the princess." Savannah closed her eyes. She didn't have the energy for stories. She didn't have the energy for anything except trying to figure out how they were going to make it to spring. But James was looking up at her with those big eyes, and Clara was leaning against her shoulder, and Michael was pretending not to listen, but she could tell he was. "All right," she said, "once upon a time." The sound of hoofbeats cut her off. Savannah's heart kicked in her chest. She stood up fast, pulling the kids behind her. Hoofbeats in winter meant one of 2 things, someone lost or someone looking for something. And out here, people who came looking usually weren't bringing good news. "Mike, get the rifle." He was already moving, pulling their father's old Springfield from its place above the door. Savannah took it from him and checked the chamber. 1 round. They had 1 round left because ammunition was expensive, and they'd used the rest trying to keep food on the table. The hoofbeats stopped outside. Savannah positioned herself in front of the door, rifle raised, hand steadier than she expected. Behind her, she could hear Clara's breathing go fast and shallow. James whimpered. Michael stood off to her left, holding the fire poker like a weapon. A knock rattled the door. "Who is it?" Savannah called. "Name's Wyatt Granger. I'm not here to cause trouble." The name hit her like cold water. Granger. Everyone in the valley knew that name. Thomas Granger owned the biggest ranch in 3 counties, ran about 5,000 head of cattle, and had enough money and influence to do pretty much whatever he wanted. The Grangers had been buying up land and pushing out homesteaders since before Savannah was born. "We don't want anything from you," she said through the door. "Didn't figure you did. But it's 15 below out here and my horse is about done. I'm asking for shelter, not making demands. Savannah looked at Michael. He shook his head hard. She didn't blame him. Letting a Granger into your house was like inviting a wolf to dinner. But leaving a man outside in this weather was murder, and she wasn't ready to have that on her conscience yet. She lowered the rifle slightly and opened the door a crack. The man on the other side was tall, maybe late 20s, with dark hair and ice in his beard. He was wrapped in a heavy coat that probably cost more than their entire cabin, and his horse, a big bay gelding, looked half frozen and exhausted. His eyes were gray and very direct. "Just you?" Savannah asked. "Just me." "You armed?" "Yes, ma'am. But I'll hand it over if that's what it takes to get warm." She studied him. He looked tired. Not dangerous tired, just regular human tired. The kind of tired you got from riding too long in bad weather. Still, he was a Granger. "You can come in," she said finally, "but the rifle stays pointed at you until I decide otherwise." "Fair enough." She stepped back and let him in, keeping the Springfield up and ready. He had to duck under the doorframe. He was even taller inside than he'd looked outside. He glanced around the cabin, took in the smoking fire, the 3 underfed kids, the bare walls, the empty shelves, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity, exactly. Something else. "Appreciate this," he said. He unbuckled his gun belt slowly and held it out. "Here." Savannah nodded at Michael, who came forward and took it, stepping back fast like the thing might bite. Wyatt Granger moved over to the fire and held his hands out to the flames. Nobody spoke. The wind hammered at the cabin walls. James had stopped whimpering, but he was staring at the stranger with huge eyes. "You're Jacob Hale's kids," Wyatt said after a minute. "What's it to you?" Savannah asked. "Nothing, just recognizing the name." He turned to look at her. "Heard about what happened. I'm sorry." "We don't need your sorry." "Didn't say you did." They stared at each other. Up close, his eyes weren't as cold as she'd thought. They were just careful, watchful, like he was used to people not trusting him. "How long were you riding?" she asked. "Most of the day. Coming back from Billings. Long way in this weather. Longer than I planned. Storm caught me south of the pass." He looked at the kids again. "You got enough food?" "We're fine," Savannah said quickly. "Didn't ask if you were fine. Asked if you had enough food." "That's none of your business." "Maybe not." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "But I've got some jerky here that's going to go to waste if someone doesn't eat it." He held it out. Nobody moved. "It's not poisoned," he said. "And I'm not trying to buy anything from you. Just don't like waste." Savannah wanted to throw it back in his face, wanted to tell him they didn't need charity from people like him. But James was staring at that bundle like it was the answer to every prayer he'd ever said, and Clara had stopped coughing just to watch, and Michael's throat was working like he was trying not to swallow. "Fine," she said. "Give it to Mike." Wyatt tossed the bundle to Michael, who caught it and immediately started unwrapping it. Inside was more jerky than they'd seen in 2 months, plus some hardtack and what looked like dried apples. "Clara, James, get over here," Michael said, and the 2 younger kids swarmed him. Savannah watched them tear into the food and felt something crack open in her chest. Gratitude, shame, anger, all of it at once, too big to sort out. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know. Why did you?" Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. "Because I've got 3 younger sisters, and if they were out here alone, I'd hope someone would do the same." That surprised her. She'd heard a lot about the Grangers over the years, how ruthless they were, how they crushed anyone who got in their way, but nobody had ever mentioned that Thomas Granger's son had sisters, or a conscience. "You can stay until the storm breaks," she said. "Then you leave." "Understood." He settled down by the fire, and Savannah lowered the rifle finally, propping it against the wall within reach. The kids were eating with the kind of desperate focus that made her throat tight. When was the last time they'd eaten something that wasn't flour paste or weak broth? "What's your name?" Wyatt asked James. James looked up, cheeks bulging with jerky. "James Hale. That's a good, strong name. Our pa said so, too." "He was right." Wyatt looked at Clara. "And you?" "Clara. That's Michael." "Nice to meet all of you." Wyatt glanced at Savannah. "Don't think I caught your name." "Savannah." "Savannah," he repeated like he was trying it out. "That's pretty." "It's a name." Fair enough. The wind screamed outside and the fire popped. Clara finished her jerky and leaned against Michael's shoulder, eyes drooping. James was already half asleep on the floor, still clutching a piece of hardtack. Savannah watched them and felt the exhaustion rolling over her in waves. She'd been running on nothing for so long that she barely remembered what it felt like to rest. "How old are you?" Wyatt asked. 22. "And you're managing this place alone?" "We're managing fine." He didn't argue, but his eyes swept the cabin again. The holes in the walls that let the wind through, the empty shelves, the worn-down everything. She could see him adding it up, could see him reaching the same conclusion everyone else did. They weren't going to make it. "You know your claim's not finished," he said. Savannah's jaw tightened. "We're working on it." Working on it how? "No offense, but you can't prove up a homestead with 3 kids and no cash. The land office doesn't care about effort. They care about improvements, buildings, crops, fences." "I know what they care about." "Then you know you're in trouble. We'll figure it out. Will you?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're about 6 inches from disaster. And come spring, when the land office comes around, they're going to see exactly what I see. An unfinished claim on prime grazing land. And then someone's going to file a challenge. Let them try." "Savannah." His voice was quieter now, but there was steel underneath. "They won't just try. They'll win, and then you'll lose everything your parents died for." The truth of it hit her like a fist. She'd been trying not to think about it, about the fact that their claim was incomplete, that the cabin was falling apart, that the land office required specific improvements to finalize a homestead patent, and they had exactly none of them. She'd been so focused on just surviving day to day that she hadn't let herself look at the bigger picture. But now this stranger was laying it out for her, and there was nowhere to hide from it. "What do you want?" she asked. "Nothing." "Nobody helps for nothing, especially not a Granger." Something flickered across his face, hurt maybe, or resignation. "You're right," he said. "Nobody does. But maybe I'm tired of being what people expect." "So what, you're going to save us? Fix our cabin and make everything better?" "No, I'm going to offer you a deal." There it was. Savannah felt the ice settle back into her spine. "I'm listening." "I help you finish the improvements. Get the cabin fixed. Help with whatever the land office needs to see. In return, you let me graze some cattle on the back 40 acres come spring." "That's it?" "That's it. And when we say no? Then I leave when the storm clears and you go back to doing whatever you were doing before I showed up." "But Savannah," he looked at her dead on, "you're not going to make it to spring. Not like this. You know it, and I know it." She wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him that they were fine, that they didn't need his help, that they'd survive out of pure stubborn refusal to die. But the words stuck in her throat because he was right. They weren't going to make it. "Why do you care?" she whispered. He was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm howled. "Because I'm tired of watching good people lose," he said finally, "and because you remind me of my sisters, and because maybe I want to do something that matters for once." Savannah looked at her siblings. Michael had fallen asleep sitting up. Clara was curled against him. James was snoring softly on the floor. They looked so small, so fragile. How had she ever thought she could do this alone? "If I say yes," she said slowly, "we do this on my terms. This is our land, our home. You help us keep it, but you don't own it. You don't control it. Understood?" "Understood. And if you try anything, if this is some scheme to steal our claim or trick us, I will put that bullet through your skull before you can blink." He almost smiled. "Noted." She held out her hand. "Deal." His hand was warm and rough with work. They shook once, firmly, and something shifted in the air between them. An agreement. A truce. Maybe the beginning of something neither of them could see coming. "Storm's letting up," Wyatt said, glancing toward the door. "You can stay until morning," Savannah said. "It's not safe to ride in the dark." "Appreciate it." She settled back against the wall, rifle across her lap, and watched him bank the fire. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, someone who knew how to survive. "Wyatt," she said. "Yeah?" "Why were you really out here?" He paused, then looked at her. My father's planning to file challenges on about a dozen homesteads come spring. Yours is one of them. I wanted to see it for myself before he sent his lawyers. The cold came back sharp and sudden. And? And I'm going to make sure he doesn't win. Why? Because it's wrong. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And because someone needs to start standing up to him. Savannah didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if she could trust him. But in that moment, with her siblings asleep and the storm finally quiet, and a stranger offering the first real hope she'd felt in months, she let herself believe. Just for a minute. Just long enough to feel something other than fear. Go. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Savannah woke to find Wyatt already gone, his horse's tracks leading north toward the Granger ranch. On the table, he'd left a small sack of coffee beans, real coffee, not the chicory substitute they'd been drinking, and a note written in neat handwriting. I'll be back in 3 days. Start making a list of what needs fixing. W.G. Michael picked up the coffee beans like they might disappear. Is he serious? I don't know, Savannah said. Do you think he'll come back? She looked out the window at the tracks disappearing into the snow. I don't know that either. But 3 days later, exactly as promised, Wyatt Granger came riding back through the snow with a pack mule loaded down with lumber, nails, tar paper, and tools. He didn't ask permission, he just started working. First, he fixed the door, then the window frames. Then he climbed up on the roof and patched the holes that had been letting snow into the loft. Michael followed him around like a puppy, handing him tools and asking questions, and Wyatt answered every single one with patience Savannah wouldn't have expected from a cattle baron's son. Clara warmed up to him slower, but by the end of the first day she was showing him her collection of rocks and telling him about the deer she'd seen last summer. James appointed himself Wyatt's official helper and took the job very seriously, which mostly meant standing nearby and offering encouragement. Savannah watched all of this from a careful distance, rifle always within reach, waiting for the catch, for the moment when Wyatt would reveal what he really wanted. But it didn't come. He just kept working. On the second day he brought meat, 2 rabbits and part of a deer. He showed Michael how to set snares properly, where to place them, how to check them without scaring off future game. Michael soaked it up like drought-dry earth soaking up rain. On the third day, he brought more supplies and news. Talk to the land office in Helena, he said, hammering a board into place on the cabin's north wall. Your father filed the initial claim, but he didn't finish the patent application before he died. You've got until May to complete the improvements and pay the fees, or the claim opens up for challenge. May, Savannah repeated. That's 3 months. 3 months to finish the cabin, build a fence around at least 5 acres, and show some kind of cultivation, plus $50 in filing fees. $50 might as well have been $5,000. They didn't have 50 cents. I'll work it out, she said. Wyatt paused and looked at her. I can lend you the money. No. Savannah, I said no. We're not starting out in debt to you. It's not debt, it's help. Same thing. He set down his hammer. You know what stubbornness gets you out here? Dead. That's it. Just dead. There's no prize for suffering more than you have to. And there's no pride in taking handouts from rich men. Pride doesn't keep you warm in winter. Maybe not, but it's all I've got left. They stared at each other. The tension stretched out thin and sharp between them. Finally, Wyatt sighed. Fine. Then we do it another way. I hire Michael to help with spring roundup. $3 a week for 8 weeks. That's $24. Clara can do mending for my sisters. They'll pay fair. That's another 10 if she's fast. James can collect eggs at the ranch. James is 6. Kids younger than him work. You know that. Savannah's jaw worked. She did know that. She hated it, but she knew it. And what about me? She asked. You keep this place running. Get the crops planted. Deal with the land office. That's a full-time job right there. It was clever. He was offering them work, not charity, giving them a way to earn the money without feeling like they were being bought. It should have made her feel better. Instead, it made her suspicious. Why are you doing this? She asked for the third time. I told you. No, tell me the real reason. Nobody goes this far out of their way for strangers, not unless they want something. Wyatt looked down at his hands. They were scarred and rough, working hands despite his family's money. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. You want the truth? I'm doing this because I'm tired of being ashamed every time I look in a mirror. My father's been stealing land from people like you my whole life, and I've stood by and let it happen because he's my father and I didn't know what else to do. But your folks, they came out here with nothing and tried to build something honest, and they died trying. And now you're out here with 3 kids, starving and freezing, trying to hold on to what they died for. And if I don't help you, I'm just as bad as him. The honesty of it hit her like a slap. She could see it in his face, the guilt, the anger, the need to be something other than what his name said he was. You can't save everyone, she said softly. I know, but I can try to save someone. The silence stretched out. Claire was humming somewhere inside the cabin. James was talking to Wyatt's horse. Michael was probably listening to every word they were saying. All right, Savannah said finally. We'll take the work, but we do it fair. We earn every cent. Wouldn't have it any other way. They shook on it again, and this time when their hands met, Savannah felt something shift. Not trust exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. Maybe the start of something neither of them knew how to name yet. Over the next 2 weeks, Wyatt kept coming back. He'd show up at dawn with his tools and work until the sun went down. He reinforced the cabin's foundation. He built a proper chicken coop. He helped Savannah repair the plow her father had left behind. He brought supplies, nails, wire, seeds for spring planting, and refused to take payment for any of it. Consider it an investment, he said when she protested. You get the homestead secured, I get grazing rights. Everyone wins. Michael started following him everywhere, soaking up everything Wyatt taught him about horses and cattle and surviving the frontier. Clara came out of her shell enough to chatter at him during meals. Even James stopped being scared and started treating Wyatt like a favorite uncle. Savannah watched it happen and felt something complicated unfold in her chest. Relief that they were no longer alone. Fear that she was starting to depend on someone who might disappear. And underneath it all, something else. Something warm and dangerous that she tried very hard not to think about. Because Wyatt Granger was everything she couldn't afford to want. He was rich, educated, connected to a family that would eat her alive if they knew what he was doing out here. And he was temporary. Once the homestead was secure, once the land office approved their claim, he'd go back to his world and she'd stay in hers. That's what she told herself. But then he'd smile at something James said, or he'd catch her eye across the fire, or he'd hand her coffee in the morning with their fingers brushing, and she'd feel the careful walls she'd built start to crack. It was February when everything changed. Wyatt arrived earlier than usual, riding hard, his face tight with something that looked like fear. What's wrong? Savannah asked before he'd even dismounted. My father knows. Her stomach dropped. Knows what? That I've been coming here, that I've been helping you. Someone saw me and told him. He swung down from his horse. He's furious. What does that mean for us? It means he's moving up his timeline. He's going to file the challenge next week instead of waiting until May. Can he do that? He can do whatever he wants. He owns half the territorial government. Savannah felt the fear spike cold in her veins. So what do? We finish the improvements now, today. Get everything done that the land office needs to see, and then we file for the patent ourselves before he can block it. That's impossible. We still need to I know what we need. I've got men coming from town, good men who owe me favors and won't talk. We're going to work through the night if we have to, but we're going to get this done. Michael had come outside. What's happening? We're building a fence, Wyatt said. Fast. You ever build a fence before? No, but I can learn. Good. Let's go. What followed was 2 days of the hardest work Savannah had ever done. Wyatt's men showed up, 3 ranch hands who clearly thought their boss had lost his mind, but were loyal enough not to say so. And they worked like demons. They built fence line around 5 acres of cleared land. They dug a proper well. They expanded the cabin's footprint and added a storage shed. They planted early-season crops that would show as cultivation for the land office. Savannah worked alongside them, hammering posts and stretching wire until her hands bled. Michael worked until he could barely stand. Even Clara and James helped, carrying tools and water and doing whatever small tasks they were given. and Wyatt worked hardest of all, driving himself and everyone else with a kind of desperate intensity, because they all knew what was coming. On the third day, they finished. Savannah stood in the middle of their property and looked around at what they'd built. The cabin was solid now, with real glass windows and a roof that wouldn't leak. The fence line stretched clean and straight. The well had good water. The field was planted. It looked like a real homestead, like something permanent. "It's not perfect," Wyatt said, coming to stand beside her. "But it's enough. The land office won't be able to deny the claim." "When do we file?" "Tomorrow. I'm riding into Helena tonight with the paperwork. I'll file it first thing in the morning, before my father can get there." "Wyatt," she turned to face him. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to—" "Don't," he said. "Don't thank me. This should have been done months ago. This should have been done by people who actually gave a damn about homesteaders, instead of just taking from them. Still, you didn't have to help us, but you did." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch, something that looked like the same dangerous thing she'd been trying not to feel. "Savannah," he said quietly, "I didn't help you because it was the right thing to do. I mean, it was, but that's not why." "Then why?" He reached out slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand was rough and warm. "Because the first time I saw you standing in that doorway with a rifle pointed at my chest, scared and defiant and refusing to give up, I knew you were the strongest person I'd ever met. And I wanted to be part of whatever fight you were fighting." Her heart was hammering. "Wyatt, I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I know I'm the last person you should trust. I know my name means things you hate. But I need you to know that these last few weeks, being out here with you and your family, it's the first time I felt like what I was doing mattered. Like I mattered." Savannah couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could do was stare at him and feel everything she'd been pushing down come roaring up. "You matter," she whispered. And then before she could stop herself, before she could remember all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, she kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it was enough to change everything. When she pulled back, Wyatt was staring at her like she'd just handed him the sky. "Savannah, go," she said. "File the papers. Save our home. And then—" She paused. "And then come back." "I'll come back," he promised. "I swear." He rode out that night, and Savannah watched him disappear into the darkness with the paperwork that would secure their future. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just sealed both their fates. Because Thomas Granger didn't just know his son was helping homesteaders, he knew exactly which homesteader, and he was about to make sure they both paid for it. Wyatt didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. By the third day, Savannah was pacing the cabin like a caged animal, checking the ridge every 10 minutes for riders that never appeared. Michael kept asking questions she couldn't answer. Clara had gone quiet again. James sensed the tension and stayed close to his sister's skirts. "Maybe the land office was closed," Michael offered at breakfast on the fourth day. "For 4 days?" Savannah snapped, then immediately regretted it when she saw him flinch. "I'm sorry, I'm just worried," Michael finished. "Me too." She was more than worried. She was terrified, because Wyatt had promised to come back, and he'd kept every promise he'd made so far, which meant something had stopped him. And out here, things that stopped people were rarely good. On the 5th day, someone finally came. But it wasn't Wyatt. Savannah saw the dust rising from the north road around noon and felt her stomach clench. Too many riders. At least 6, maybe more. She grabbed the rifle and positioned herself on the porch while Michael herded Clara and James inside. The riders came into view 5 minutes later. 6 men on horseback, dressed like ranch hands, but carrying themselves like something harder, like men used to enforcing things. And leading them was someone who could only be Thomas Granger himself. He was in his 50s, built like an oak barrel, with silver hair and a face that had been handsome once before decades of getting exactly what he wanted had turned it cruel. He sat his horse like he owned not just the animal, but the ground beneath it. Probably thought he did. The riders stopped 20 feet from the cabin. Nobody dismounted. "You're Savannah Hale," Thomas Granger said. It wasn't a question. "This is private property," Savannah called back, rifle steady. "State your business or leave." Granger smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Private property. That's interesting, given that your claim's not finalized yet. As I understand it, you're still 3 months from proving up. Lot can happen in 3 months. We filed the patent application 5 days ago. It's done. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or anger. Is that so? Funny thing about that. My lawyers checked with the land office in Helena yesterday. No application on file for this property. Savannah's blood went cold. That's not possible. Wyatt filed it himself. Ah, yes. My son. The smile got sharper. Wyatt's at home right now, where he's been for the past 5 days. Under guard, actually, after he decided to make some very poor choices about where to spend his time and money. The world tilted. What did you do to him? Nothing he didn't bring on himself. Boy's been sneaking around behind my back, helping homesteaders, making a fool of the Granger name. You understand, I couldn't let that continue. If you hurt him, I'm his father. I discipline him as I see fit. Granger leaned forward in his saddle. But we're not here to discuss Wyatt. We're here to discuss your situation, which is, frankly, desperate. We're fine. You're not. Your claim's incomplete. You've got no legal standing, and as of this morning, I filed a land challenge with the territorial office in Billings. 6 weeks from now, there will be a hearing. And unless you can prove continuous improvement and occupation since your father's death, which we both know you can't, this land reverts to open range, which I'll be filing on immediately. Savannah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the rifle. You can't do that. I can. I have. It's done. This is our home. We've lived here for 3 years. We've improved it. Have you? Because my surveyors didn't see much improvement when they came through last fall. Saw a lot of unfinished structures and untilled land. Saw a family that didn't have the resources to complete their claim. He shrugged. It's unfortunate, but the law is clear. You don't finish, you don't get to stay. We will finish. We'll show the court everything. With what money? What labor? You're a 22-year-old woman with 3 children and no income. The court's going to take one look at you and rule in my favor. And then you'll have 2 weeks to vacate before the sheriff removes you by force. One of the ranch hands behind Granger shifted in his saddle, and Savannah caught the glint of a rifle butt. They'd come armed, ready for trouble. Hoping for it, maybe. Why are you doing this? She asked. There's thousands of acres out here. Why do you need ours? Because it's mine, Granger said simply. This whole valley's mine. Has been for 20 years. Your father was a squatter who got lucky with a government program designed to give away what wasn't theirs to give. But that program's got rules, girl, and you're not following them. The rules say we have until May. The rules say I can file a challenge anytime I have grounds. And your father's death gave me grounds. He gathered his reins. You've got 6 weeks. Use them to pack. Find somewhere else to go. Because come April, you're gone. No. Excuse me? Savannah stepped off the porch, rifle pointed at the ground but ready. Her voice was steadier than her hands. I said no. You want this land, you'll have to drag us off it. And I promise you, Mr. Granger, that's going to be harder than you think. For a moment, something that looked like respect crossed his face. Just a flicker, there and gone. You got your mother's fire, he said. She had that same look in her eyes when she told me off at the general store once, right before she married your father and made the biggest mistake of her life. He turned his horse. 6 weeks, Miss Hale. After that, whatever happens is on you. They rode out, leaving nothing but dust and dread. Savannah stood there until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch steps. The rifle clattered beside her. She put her face in her hands and tried to breathe through the panic. The door opened behind her. Michael came out and sat down next to her, not saying anything. After a minute, Clara came out too, then James. They pressed close on either side, and Savannah wrapped her arms around all of them. Are they going to take our house? James whispered. No, Savannah said. She didn't know if it was true, but she said it anyway. No, they're not. What do we do? Michael asked. I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. What about Wyatt? That was the question that hurt. What about Wyatt? Was he really locked up at his father's ranch? Had he even made it to Helena, or had Thomas caught him before he could file the papers? And if Wyatt had filed them, where were they now? I need to go into town, Savannah said, standing up. Michael, you're in charge. Keep the doors locked. Don't let anyone in unless it's me or... She stopped. She'd almost said, or Wyatt, but she didn't know if Wyatt was coming back anymore. Be careful, Michael said. I will. She saddled their old mare, a swayback roan that had been her mother's and was probably too old for this kind of trip, but was all they had, and rode south toward the nearest town. It was called Crossroads, population maybe 300, and it sat where the mining road met the cattle trail. Savannah had been there twice since her parents died, both times to buy supplies they couldn't make themselves. The town looked the same as it always did. Muddy streets, false front buildings, more saloons than churches. She tied her horse outside the land office and went in. The clerk was a thin man named Morrison, who looked like he'd never been outdoors a day in his life. He glanced up when she entered, took in her patched dress and worn boots, and went back to his paperwork. Help you? He said without looking up. I need to check on a homestead filing. Hale claim, Section 12, Township 9. Don't have anything here. All filings go through Helena. I know, but a patent application was supposed to be filed 5 days ago. I need to know if it went through. Morrison sighed and pulled out a ledger. He flipped through it slowly, running his finger down columns of names. Hale. Oh. Yeah, here. Jacob Hale, original filer, deceased October 1881. No patent application on record. Claims currently under challenge by Thomas Granger, hearing set for April 1st in Billings. That can't be right. The application was filed. I have a witness. Don't see anything here, miss. If it was filed, it wasn't filed properly. He looked at her over his spectacles. You family? It's my claim, my father's claim. Well, you'll want to get yourself a lawyer then. Challenge hearings aren't something you can handle alone. How much do lawyers cost? Good one? $100, maybe more. $100. She could work for 5 years and not save that much. Is there any way to see the actual filing, to check if something got lost? You'd have to go to Helena for that. But I can tell you right now, if Thomas Granger says it wasn't filed, it wasn't filed. Man's got lawyers going through those records every week looking for exactly this kind of thing. Savannah felt the walls closing in. There has to be something. Look, miss. Morrison's voice got a little gentler. I've seen a lot of homesteaders come through here. Most of them don't make it. It's not your fault. It's just how things are. The big ranchers got here first, and they've got the money and connections to squeeze out anyone who tries to stake a claim on land they want. Your best bet is to sell what you can, take the money, and start over somewhere else. This is our home. I know, and I'm sorry, but fighting Thomas Granger is like fighting winter. You're going to lose, and you're going to lose hard. She left without another word, climbed back on her horse, and just sat there in the street for a long time. Around her, Crossroads went about its business. Men loading wagons, women shopping, kids playing in the mud. Normal people living normal lives, not realizing that her entire world was collapsing. A saloon door opened across the street, and 2 men stumbled out, laughing. One of them was wearing a Granger Ranch brand on his vest. Savannah made a decision. She rode north, but not toward home. Toward the Granger Ranch. It took her 3 hours to get there, and by the time she saw the main house rising out of the prairie like a fortress, the sun was getting low. The place was massive, a sprawling 2-story structure with a wraparound porch, outbuildings in every direction, corrals full of horses, and a bunkhouse that looked bigger than most of the cabins in the valley. 2 men stopped her at the gate, both armed. State your business, one of them said. I need to see Wyatt Granger. He's not taking visitors. Tell him Savannah Hale is here. He'll want to see me. The men looked at each other. One of them shrugged and walked toward the house. Savannah waited, hands wrapped in her horse's reins, trying not to shake. 5 minutes later, the man came back. Mr. Granger says you can come up to the house, but you leave the horse here. Fine. She dismounted and walked up the long drive, flanked by both guards like she was a prisoner, which, she supposed, she sort of was. The front door opened before she reached it, and Thomas Granger stepped out. Miss Hale, he said, this is unexpected. I want to see Wyatt. I'm sure you do. Unfortunately, my son's indisposed at the moment. Let me see him. That's not going to happen. Savannah stopped in the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at him. Where are the papers? The homestead application Wyatt filed. Where is it? I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. He filed it in Helena, and somehow it never made it to the land office. So where is it? Granger studied her for a long moment. You're not stupid, I'll give you that. But you're in over your head, girl. Go home. Take care of those kids. Find some nice young man to marry who'll give you a real home instead of this fantasy you're clinging to. I don't want a real home. I want my home. Same thing I just said, except your version involves freezing and starving while pretending you're pioneering something. My version involves you having an actual future. Is that what you told Wyatt? When you locked him up for trying to help us? Something hardened in Granger's expression. What I tell my son is between me and him, but since you brought it up, yes, I told him he was throwing his life away on people who couldn't be saved. Told him he was making an enemy of his own family for a homesteader girl who'll be gone inside a year. And you know what? He didn't have an answer for that. Because deep down, he knows I'm right. You're not right. You're just powerful. There's a difference. In this territory? There's not. The door opened behind Granger, and a woman came out, tall, elegant, with dark hair going gray and Wyatt's gray eyes. His mother, Savannah guessed. Thomas, the woman said quietly, let her see him. Caroline, let her see him. 5 minutes. What harm could it do? Granger looked like he wanted to argue, but something in his wife's face stopped him. He stepped aside with a gesture that was almost violent in its abruptness. 5 minutes, he said. Then you leave and don't come back. Caroline Granger led Savannah through a house that was almost painfully beautiful. Polished wood, expensive furniture, paintings on the walls, and up a staircase to the second floor. She stopped at a door at the end of the hall and knocked softly. Wyatt, you have a visitor. She opened the door without waiting for an answer and ushered Savannah inside. The room was large and well-appointed, with a bed, a desk, and windows that looked out over the ranch. It didn't look like a prison, but the chair wedged under the door handle from the outside told a different story. Wyatt was sitting on the bed, and he looked terrible. Not hurt exactly, but exhausted and angry, and something else. Something broken. Savannah, he said, standing up fast, what are you doing here? Your father came to the cabin. He said, her voice cracked. He said you never filed the papers, that the claim challenge is going forward and we're going to lose everything. Wyatt's jaw clenched. I filed them. I swear to you, I filed them in Helena the morning after I left your place. I gave them directly to the registrar. Then where are they? My father got to them. Must have. He's got people everywhere, in the land office, the territorial government, the courts. He found out what I did and made sure the filing disappeared. Can we refile? Not without the original documentation, which I don't have anymore, and not without paying the fees again, which I can't do because he's cut off my access to money. He crossed the room and took her hands. Savannah, I'm so sorry. I thought I could get ahead of him. I thought if I moved fast enough, it's not your fault. It is. I knew what he was capable of, and I thought I could beat him anyway. I was naive. Caroline Granger cleared her throat from the doorway. You have 3 minutes left. Wyatt looked at his mother. You could help us. You know this is wrong. What I know, Caroline said carefully, is that your father's built everything we have by being ruthless. And I've benefited from that ruthlessness for 30 years. I'm not suddenly going to develop principles now. So you're just going to let him steal their home? I'm going to let him do what he's always done. And you're going to learn that fighting him only makes things worse. She glanced at Savannah. 2 minutes. When she left, Wyatt pulled Savannah close. She could feel him trembling. There has to be something we can do, she said. I don't know what. He's got me locked in here. He's cut me off from everything. I can't even get word to the ranch hands who helped us without him finding out. He pulled back enough to look at her. You need to take the kids and leave. Go to California or Oregon or anywhere that's not here. No. Savannah, I'm not running. Not from him, not from anyone. This is our land, and I'm not giving it up without a fight. You can't win this fight. He's too powerful. Maybe, but I can make him work for it. I can make him prove to the whole territory that he's exactly the kind of man everyone already knows he is. A rich bully who steals from families because he can. Wyatt looked at her with something that might have been awe. You're serious. Completely. He'll crush you. Probably. But at least I'll go down fighting. She touched his face. And maybe that'll be enough. Time's up, Caroline said from the hallway. Savannah kissed him quickly, desperately, and then she was being ushered out of the room and down the stairs and back outside where her horse was waiting. She mounted up under Thomas Granger's cold gaze. Feel better? He asked. No, but I know what I'm fighting now. And what's that? A man who's so empty inside he has to steal from orphans to feel big. She saw the rage flash across his face and kicked her horse before he could respond. She rode hard back toward home, and the whole way she tried to figure out how someone with no money, no lawyers, and no chance could possibly win a battle against a cattle baron. She still hadn't found an answer by the time she reached the cabin. Michael was waiting on the porch, and the look on his face stopped her cold. What happened? Someone left this. He held out a folded piece of paper. Savannah opened it. The message was short and written in a careful hand she didn't recognize. If you want to save your claim, be at the Prospector's Saloon in Crossroads tomorrow at noon. Come alone. Tell no one. Who left it? Savannah asked. Don't know. It was stuck in the door when I went to get water. Savannah stared at the note. It could be a trap. Could be Thomas Granger's way of getting her off the property so his men could come in and destroy everything they'd built. Could be anything. But it was also the only lead she had. Tomorrow I'm going to town, she said. You three stay here. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone. Savannah, I mean it, Mike. Anyone. He nodded reluctantly, and Savannah went inside to figure out what the hell she was walking into. The next day, she rode into Crossroads at 1:45, Springfield rifle across her saddle, and every nerve on edge. The Prospector's Saloon was a rough place even by frontier standards, the kind of establishment where more deals were broken than made, and the sawdust on the floor was there to soak up blood as much as spilled whiskey. She tied her horse and pushed through the doors. The place was nearly empty, a bartender wiping glasses, 2 old-timers playing cards in the corner, and at a table in the back, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a scar running from her temple to her jaw. The woman gestured to the empty chair across from her. Savannah sat down, rifle across her lap. You're either very brave or very stupid, the woman said. Probably both. Who are you? Name's Ruth Mackenzie. I own the feed store on the north edge of town. And before that, I was a homesteader like you. She took a sip of whiskey. Until Thomas Granger stole my land the same way he's trying to steal yours. Savannah felt something click into place. You sent the note. I did. Because I've been watching what's happening and I'm tired of watching good people lose. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. Trust is for people who have options. You don't. Ruth leaned forward. But I can help you. If you're willing to do something that might get both of us killed. I'm listening. Granger's challenge is based on your claim being incomplete. No improvements, no continuous occupation, no documentation. But what if you had documentation? What if you had proof that your family met every requirement? We don't have that proof. My father kept terrible records. No. But the land office in Helena has records. Every claim filed, every inspection done, every improvement verified. Your father's file is there. And I'm betting it shows a lot more progress than Granger's lawyers want anyone to see. So we get the file. We steal it, Ruth corrected. Break into the land office, find your father's records, and make copies before anyone notices they're gone. Then we use those copies in court to prove Granger's lying about your claim status. Savannah stared at her. That's insane. That's frontier justice. Ruth's smile was sharp. I've done it before. Lost my land anyway because I didn't have anyone who'd testify for me. But you've got something I didn't. You've got Thomas Granger's son on your side. Wyatt's locked up. He can't help. Maybe not directly, but the territorial judge hates Thomas Granger, hates everything he stands for. If Wyatt publicly testifies against his father, if he breaks ranks and tells the court what Granger's been doing, that might be enough to tip the scales. And you think he'd do that? I think a man who walks away from his inheritance to help a homesteader girl might do a lot of things people don't expect. Ruth finished her whiskey. So here's the question, Savannah Hale. Do you want to save your land badly enough to break the law? Because that's what this is going to take. Savannah thought about her siblings, about the cabin her parents died building, about Wyatt locked in his father's house because he'd tried to help them, about 3 years of suffering and struggle and refusing to quit. When do we leave? She asked. Ruth smiled. Tonight, pack light. We've got a long ride ahead. They left Crossroads just after midnight, 2 women on horseback with saddlebags full of tools that would get them hanged if anyone asked what they were for. Ruth rode like she'd spent half her life in the saddle, which she probably had. Savannah tried to keep up and not think too hard about what they were about to do. The ride to Helena took them through country that got rougher the farther north they went. Rocky passes, narrow trails, places where one wrong step would send horse and rider tumbling into darkness. Ruth didn't slow down. She rode like something was chasing them, and maybe something was. Maybe they were racing against time itself. They didn't talk much. Around 3 in the morning, they stopped to rest the horses, and Ruth pulled out a flask. "Drink," she said, offering it to Savannah. Wasn't asking. You need to warm up, and we've got another 4 hours ahead of us." Savannah drank. Whatever was in the flask burned going down and settled like fire in her stomach. She handed it back, coughing. "What is that?" "Something a miner taught me to make. Don't ask what's in it." Ruth took a long pull and wiped her mouth. "You scared?" "Terrified." "Good. Means you're smart. You know what happened to the last person who tried to go up against Thomas Granger?" "What?" "He disappeared. Just gone one day. Found his horse wandering loose about a week later. Never found him." Ruth's eyes were hard in the moonlight. "I'm not telling you this to scare you more. I'm telling you so you know what we're dealing with. If we get caught doing this, we won't see a courtroom. We'll just vanish." "Then why are you helping me?" "Because I'm tired of being scared. Because I lost everything I built and nobody gave a damn. And because maybe if we do this right, we can stop him from doing it to someone else." She stood up and stretched. "Come on, we're burning moonlight." They reached Helena around 7 in the morning, both of them exhausted and filthy from the road. The territorial capital was bigger than Crossroads, real buildings, paved streets in some places. Enough people that 2 more didn't draw attention. Ruth led them to a boarding house on the edge of town run by a woman who didn't ask questions. "We need a room and a place to stable the horses," Ruth said, "and we need you to forget you saw us." The woman, old, bent, with eyes that had seen everything, looked them over and named a price that was probably twice the going rate. Ruth paid it without arguing. They slept until noon, then Ruth woke Savannah with a shake that was almost rough. "Up, we need to scout the location before dark." The land office was a square brick building near the center of town, imposing and official-looking in a way that made Savannah's stomach turn. Ruth walked past it twice, casual as Sunday, noting the windows, the doors, the patterns of people coming and going. "They close at 5, she said when they'd circled back to a small restaurant across the street. "Then the clerk locks up and goes home. Building's empty all night, except for a watchman who makes rounds every 2 hours. "How do you know that?" "Because I watched this place for 3 weeks before I made my attempt. Learned the rhythms. Learned who was predictable and who wasn't." Ruth stirred sugar into her coffee. "The watchman's name is Garrett. He's 68 years old, half deaf, and he carries a pistol he's never fired. He starts his rounds at 8, midnight, and 4 in the morning. Takes him about 20 minutes to walk the whole building." "So we go in at 8:30? "No, we go in at 7, before he even starts. Hide in the storage room on the first floor until his first round is done, then head upstairs to the records office." "What if someone sees us going in?" "They won't. There's a side entrance that the clerks use. Locks from the outside, but not the inside. We pick it once, we're in." Savannah looked at Ruth. Really looked at her. The scar, the hard eyes, the way she moved like someone who'd learned to expect trouble. "Who are you really, before all this?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. Someone who believed the frontier was supposed to be different. Someone who thought if you worked hard enough and followed the rules, you'd get to keep what you earned. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I was wrong." "What happened to your family?" "Don't have one. Husband died of cholera 6 months after we proved up our claim. No kids. Just me and 160 acres that I broke my back turning into something. Then Granger decided he wanted a clear path to the river, and my land was in his way." She looked out the window. "Took him 3 years, but he got it. Used every legal trick, every delay, every lawyer he could buy. And when I finally ran out of money to fight him, he showed up with papers saying the land was his, and I had 48 hours to leave. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be angry. Anger's more useful." Ruth finished her coffee and stood. "Come on. We've got work to do." They spent the afternoon gathering supplies. Lockpicks, which Ruth somehow knew where to buy from a pawn shop owner who barely looked at them. dark clothes, a small oil lamp with a shutter, matches, a leather satchel big enough to carry documents, everything they needed to commit what amounted to burglary of a government building. By the time the sun started setting, Savannah's hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Breathe," Ruth said as they waited in an alley across from the land office. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. If you panic in there, we're both dead." "I'm not going to panic." "Yes, you are. Everyone panics their first time. The trick is not letting the panic run you." Ruth checked her pocket watch. 5 minutes. "When I move, you follow. Stay close, stay quiet, and if something goes wrong, you run. Don't wait for me. Don't try to help. Just run." "Ruth, I mean it, girl. You've got 3 kids depending on you. I've got nobody. My life's worth less than yours in the grand scheme of things." "That's not true." "Maybe not, but that's how we're playing it anyway." Ruth stood. "Time to go." They crossed the street as the last clerk left the building, locking the front door behind him. Ruth led them around to the side where a narrow door sat recessed between 2 windows. She pulled out her lockpicks and went to work while Savannah kept watch, heart hammering so loud she was sure someone would hear it. The lock clicked open. Ruth pushed the door carefully and they slipped inside, easing it closed behind them. The interior was dark and smelled like paper and dust. Savannah could barely see 2 feet in front of her. "Storage room," Ruth whispered, gripping Savannah's arm and pulling her forward. They felt their way down a narrow hallway and into a room stacked with crates and old furniture. Ruth positioned them behind a filing cabinet where they'd be hidden if anyone looked in. "Now we wait," Ruth said. The waiting was worse than the breaking in. Savannah sat in the dark with her back against the wall and listened to every sound, the building settling, footsteps on the street outside, her own breathing that seemed impossibly loud. Minutes felt like hours. Her legs cramped. Her neck hurt. She needed to move but didn't dare. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. Heavy footsteps. The watchman starting his rounds. Savannah held her breath as the footsteps came closer, past their hiding spot, and continued on. She heard him climb stairs, walk overhead, come back down. The whole round took him 18 minutes. Ruth waited another 10 before she moved. "Let's go." They crept out of the storage room and up the stairs Ruth had memorized. The records office was on the 2nd floor behind a door marked with an official seal. Ruth picked this lock too, faster than the first, and they slipped inside. The room was full of filing cabinets, each one labeled with territorial designations and date ranges. Ruth lit the oil lamp, keeping the shutter mostly closed so only a sliver of light escaped. "Homestead claims are in the back, organized by township and section. What's your property designation?" "Township 9, Section 12. Ruth moved through the cabinets with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. She found the right drawer, pulled it open, and started flipping through files. "Hale? Hale, here." She pulled out a folder thick with documents and spread them on top of the cabinet. Savannah leaned in, squinting in the dim light. The first document was her father's original claim filing, dated 1879. Behind it were inspection reports, improvement certifications, witness statements from neighbors confirming occupation and cultivation. Page after page of documentation showing that Jacob Hale had followed every requirement, met every deadline, done everything the law demanded. And at the very back of the file was something else. A letter dated 3 months before her father's death from the Territorial Land Office, approving the claim for final patent pending payment of fees. "This is it," Savannah breathed. "This proves we have legal standing. We were approved. All we needed was to pay the fees." "Which your father probably planned to do before he got sick," Ruth said. She was already pulling out paper and a pencil. "Start copying. We need exact transcripts of everything, dates, signatures, seal numbers. If we miss one detail, they'll know these are forgeries." They worked quickly, Ruth's handwriting neat and precise as she copied document after document. Savannah kept watch, listening for footsteps, checking the window for movement outside. Every minute felt like borrowed time. They were halfway through the file when Savannah heard something that made her blood freeze. Voices, coming up the stairs. "Ruth," she hissed. Ruth's head snapped up. She listened, then swore quietly and started shoving documents back into the folder. "Out, now!" "We're not done. We're done enough. Move." But they were already out of time. The voices were right outside the door. Ruth shoved the file back into the cabinet and killed the lamp just as the doors started to open. They dove behind a row of filing cabinets as light flooded the room. 2 men entered, both wearing deputy badges. "Probably nothing," one of them was saying. "Garrett thinks he heard something, but Garrett hears ghosts every other night. Still gotta check. Those are the rules." The deputies moved through the room, their lanterns casting moving shadows. Savannah pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing, Ruth rigid beside her. One of the deputies walked right past their hiding spot, close enough that Savannah could have reached out and touched him. "See? Nothing," the first deputy said. "Told you." "Yeah, well, better safe than sorry. Granger's been on edge lately about people messing with land records. Says there's homesteaders trying to fake documentation. Granger sees conspiracies everywhere. Man's paranoid. Man's also rich enough to have us fired if we don't take his paranoia seriously." The deputies left, and Savannah waited for their footsteps to fade completely before she let herself breathe again. Ruth grabbed her arm. "We're blown. They're going to post extra guards now. We need to leave." "But the documents—" "We got enough. Trust me." They made it down the stairs and out the side door without being seen. But Savannah could hear more men arriving, voices raised, someone shouting orders. By the time they reached their horses, the land office was crawling with deputies. Ruth kicked her horse into a gallop, and Savannah followed, both of them racing through Helena's streets like the hounds of hell were behind them. Maybe they were. They didn't stop until they'd cleared the city limits and put 3 miles of open country between them and pursuit. "Did we get enough?" Savannah gasped when they finally slowed. Ruth patted her saddlebag. "Your father's original filing, 2 inspection reports, and the approval letter. It's not everything, but it's enough to prove your claim was legitimate. Enough to show Granger's line when he says you never met the requirements. Will it hold up in court? That depends on the judge and on whether we can get Wyatt to testify." Ruth looked at her. "You said he'd help. You sure about that?" Savannah thought about Wyatt locked in his father's house, the look in his eyes when he'd said he was sorry. "I'm sure." "Then we've got a chance. Not a good one, but a chance." They rode through the night again, taking a different route back to avoid anyone who might be looking for them. Savannah was so tired she could barely stay in the saddle, but every time her eyes started to close, she'd think about her siblings alone in the cabin and force herself awake. They reached Crossroads 3 days before the hearing was scheduled in Billings. Ruth left her at the edge of town. "I can't go with you to court," she said. "If Granger sees me there, he'll know I was involved in this. And if he knows I was involved, he'll figure out where the documents came from. So what do I do?" "You take those papers to a lawyer, not one from around here. They're all in Granger's pocket. Find someone from Billings who doesn't owe him anything. Show them what you have and let them build your case." "I don't have money for a lawyer." Ruth reached into her coat and pulled out a small leather purse. "There's $80 here. It's not much, but it's enough to get someone to listen." "I can't take your money." "Yes, you can, because I'm giving it to you, and I'm not taking no for an answer." Ruth's voice went soft. "Let me do this, Savannah. Let me help finish what I couldn't finish for myself." Savannah took the purse, throat tight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me after you win." Ruth gathered her reins. "And Savannah, get Wyatt out of that house, however you have to do it. Because without him standing up there and telling the truth about his father, those papers aren't going to be enough." Then she was gone, disappearing back toward wherever she'd come from, leaving Savannah alone with stolen documents and 3 days to figure out how to win an impossible fight. Savannah rode straight home and found Michael, Clara, and James exactly where she'd left them, scared but safe. Michael had kept the fire going. Clara had been rationing the food. James had cried himself sick twice but hadn't opened the door for anyone. "I'm sorry," Savannah said, pulling all 3 of them close. "I'm so sorry I left you alone." "Did you find a way to save the house?" Michael asked. "Maybe. I don't know yet." She looked at them. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" They nodded, and Savannah felt the weight of their faith settle on her shoulders like stones. The next morning, she rode to Billings. The town was bigger than Helena, a real city with hotels and shops and a courthouse that looked like it meant business. She found a lawyer's office on the 2nd floor of a building near the railroad depot. The sign on the door read, "Daniel Webster, attorney at law." The man who answered her knock was younger than she expected, maybe 35, with ink stains on his fingers and a skeptical expression. "Help you?" "I need a lawyer," For a land claim hearing. I don't do homestead cases. They're messy and they don't pay. I have $80. Webster's eyebrows went up slightly. That's about half what I'd normally charge, but it's a start. What's the situation? Savannah told him everything. Her father's death, the incomplete claim, Thomas Granger's challenge, Wyatt's attempt to help, the stolen documents from Helena. Webster listened without interrupting, his expression getting darker the longer she talked. You broke into a government building, he said when she finished. Yes, that's a felony. If anyone finds out, you'll go to prison. I know. And you expect me to use illegally obtained evidence in court? I expect you to use evidence that proves my family has legal standing. I don't care where it came from. Webster was quiet for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. Let me see the documents. Savannah handed over the papers Ruth had copied. Webster spread them on his desk and studied them carefully, checking dates, comparing signatures, reading every word. These are good, he said finally. Really good. If these are legitimate copies of what's actually in the land office files, they completely undermine Granger's case. So you'll represent us? I'll represent you, but you need to understand something. Thomas Granger owns half the territorial government. He's going to bring lawyers who will make me look like a schoolboy. And Judge Hendricks, who's hearing your case, is known for being sympathetic to established landowners, meaning he's corrupt. Meaning he believes that people who've been here longer deserve more consideration than newcomers, which usually works out in favor of the cattle barons. Webster gathered the papers. But Hendricks is also proud. He doesn't like being made a fool of. If we can show him that Granger's been lying, that might piss him off enough to rule in your favor. What about Wyatt? If he testifies against his father, that would help a lot. Granger's own son turning on him would be devastating. But can you actually get him to the courthouse? I don't know. Well, you've got 2 days to figure it out, because without him, this is going to be close. Savannah left the lawyer's office and stood on the street trying to figure out how to break someone out of what amounted to house arrest. She couldn't go to the Granger ranch again. They'd be watching for her. Couldn't send Michael or one of the other kids. Couldn't hire help because she had no money left. She was still trying to work it out when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Savannah Hale? She turned and found herself face to face with Caroline Granger, Wyatt's mother. The woman was dressed elegantly, shopping basket on her arm, looking completely out of place in the rough Billings street. Mrs. Granger, Savannah said carefully, walk with me. It wasn't a request. Caroline started down the boardwalk and Savannah followed, wary and confused. They walked in silence until they reached a small park on the edge of town where no one would overhear them. My husband is going to destroy you in court, Caroline said without preamble. You understand that, don't you? He's going to try. He's going to succeed, unless something changes. Caroline looked at her directly. My son is locked in his room because he chose you over his family, over his inheritance, over everything he's ever known. Do you have any idea what that means? It means he's a good man. It means he's in love with you. The words hit Savannah like cold water. She'd known, on some level, that what was between her and Wyatt had gone past friendship or even attraction, but hearing it said out loud by his mother made it real in a way that terrified her. Don't insult me by lying. I've watched him for 30 years. I know what he looks like when he's found something that matters. Caroline's voice softened slightly. Thomas is going to break him. If Wyatt stays in that house, if he's forced to watch you lose everything from behind a locked door, it will destroy something in him that can't be fixed. Do you understand? Yes. So I'm going to help you get him out. Not because I approve of what he's doing, not because I think you're good for him, but because he's my son, and I'd rather have him alive and hating me than dead inside and obedient. Savannah stared at her. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow night there's going to be a fire in the East Barn. Small, contained, but enough to draw everyone's attention. During that fire, the kitchen door will be unlocked. Wyatt's room is on the second floor, third door from the stairs. You'll have maybe 10 minutes to get in, get him, and get out before anyone notices. This is a trap. Maybe, or maybe it's a mother trying to save her son from his father. Caroline adjusted her basket. The choice is yours, but if you don't take this chance, you won't get another one. She walked away, leaving Savannah standing alone in the park with a decision that felt too big for one person to make. That night, Savannah told Michael the plan. He listened without interrupting, then looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You're going to break into the Granger ranch." "Yes." "Based on information from Wyatt's mother, who you don't trust." "Yes." "And you think this is a good idea?" "No, but it's the only idea I have." Michael was quiet for a long time. "I'm coming with you." "No, you're not. You're staying here with Clara and James." "Savannah, if something goes wrong, they need you. Promise me you'll take care of them." He didn't want to promise. She could see it in his face. But finally he nodded, and Savannah felt something in her chest crack open. The next night, she rode north toward the Granger ranch with a knife in her boot and her father's rifle across her saddle. Around 9 o'clock, she saw orange light bloom in the distance. The barn fire, exactly as Caroline had promised. Savannah circled wide of the main house, tying her horse in a grove of trees a quarter-mile out. She approached on foot, staying low, watching as ranch hands ran toward the fire with buckets. The kitchen door stood open in the chaos. She slipped inside. The house was empty, everyone drawn to the emergency outside. Savannah climbed the stairs 2 at a time, counting doors. Third from the stairs. She tried the handle. Locked. "Wyatt," she hissed through the door. "It's me." The chair wedged under the handle from the outside clattered as someone moved it. The door opened and Wyatt stood there, shock written across his face. "Savannah? What are you—" "We're leaving, now." "How did you—" "Oh, your mother helped. I'll explain later. We have maybe 5 minutes before someone notices the fire's not spreading and comes back." Wyatt grabbed a coat and followed her down the stairs. They were almost to the kitchen door when Thomas Granger stepped into the hallway. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Granger smiled. "I should have known Caroline was involved. She's always had a soft spot for lost causes." "Get out of the way," Wyatt said. "Or what? You'll fight me? Your own father?" "If I have to." Thomas looked at his son, and something ugly moved across his face. "You've thrown away everything for this girl. Your inheritance, your future, your family name. And for what? So she can keep a worthless piece of land for another year before the frontier kills her anyway. It's not worthless, and she's not going to die. Everyone dies out here, boy. The only question is whether you die with dignity or desperation." He turned his attention to Savannah. "You've got some nerve breaking into my house. Your wife let me in. My wife made a mistake, but that's all right. I'll deal with her later. Right now I'm dealing with you." He stepped closer. "Drop the rifle." Savannah raised it instead. "No. You won't shoot me. You're not a killer." "Maybe not, but I'm desperate. You said it yourself. Desperate people do desperate things." For a moment she thought he might call her bluff, but then footsteps sounded outside and Granger's attention flicked toward the door. Wyatt grabbed Savannah's arm and they ran. They burst out of the house and sprinted toward the trees where she'd left her horse. Behind them, Granger was shouting orders, and within seconds, men were mounting up to pursue them. "We're not going to make it," Wyatt gasped as they ran. "Yes, we are." They reached the horse, and Wyatt vaulted up, pulling Savannah up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, and he kicked the horse into a dead run, crashing through underbrush toward open country. The pursuit followed, maybe 5 or 6 riders, close enough that Savannah could hear them shouting. A gunshot cracked through the night, then another. The horse screamed and stumbled, but kept running. They made it a mile before the horse finally went down, legs giving out from exhaustion or blood loss or both. Wyatt and Savannah hit the ground hard and rolled. She tasted dirt and blood. Her shoulder screamed where she'd landed on it. "Run," Wyatt said, hauling her up. They ran on foot now, through dark woods with pursuit closing in. Savannah's lungs burned. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. But she kept moving because stopping meant capture, and capture meant losing everything. Then they broke through the trees and saw it. The cabin, small and worn and home. Michael was on the porch with the rifle. "Inside!" Savannah screamed. They crashed through the door, and Michael slammed it shut behind them, throwing the new bolt Wyatt had installed weeks ago. Outside, the riders pulled up, circling the cabin like wolves around wounded prey. Thomas Granger's voice cut through the darkness. "Send my son out, or I'll burn you out." Savannah looked at Wyatt. His face was cut, his hands shaking, but his eyes were clear. "What do we do?" she whispered. We make him prove he's exactly what everyone already knows he is. Wyatt crossed to the door and threw it open. You want me? Come get me. But you're going to have to come through her to do it. The standoff lasted until dawn, and by morning, everything had changed. Thomas Granger sat on his horse in the gray pre-dawn light, staring at the cabin where his son had just chosen a homesteader girl over his own blood. Behind him, 5 ranch hands waited for orders that didn't come. Inside the cabin, Savannah could see shadows moving, Clara and James huddled together, Michael at the window with the rifle, Wyatt standing near the door like he was ready to walk out and face whatever came next. You think this changes anything? Granger finally called out. You think standing in that shack makes you noble? I think it makes me something you've never been, Wyatt shouted back. Honest. One of the ranch hands shifted nervously. Another whispered something Savannah couldn't hear. Thomas Granger's face had gone the color of old brick. I gave you everything, he said, and his voice had changed, gotten quieter, more dangerous. Every opportunity, every advantage. And this is how you repay me? By humiliating me in front of my own men? You humiliated yourself. I'm just done pretending I don't see it. For a long moment, Savannah thought Thomas might actually order his men to storm the cabin. She could see him considering it, weighing the cost. But then one of the riders cleared his throat. Boss, sun's coming up. People are going to start moving around. You want witnesses to whatever happens here? Thomas looked at the man, then back at the cabin. This isn't over, he said. Court's in 2 days. We'll settle it there. Legal and public, so everyone can see what happens to people who go against me. He wheeled his horse around. Let's go. They rode off, and Savannah finally let herself breathe. Her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the floor. Wyatt crouched beside her. You all right? No. Yes, I don't know. She looked at him. Blood was drying on his cheek from where he'd hit the ground when the horse went down. His hands were scraped raw. He looked exhausted and furious, and somehow more alive than she'd ever seen him. Your father's going to destroy you. Let him try. Wyatt, you understand what you just gave up. Your inheritance, your family. I understand what I chose. That's different. He took her hands. Savannah, I've spent my whole life watching my father take things from people who couldn't fight back. I'm done watching. I'm done being part of it. Even if it costs you everything? Everything I had came from him, from land he stole, money he made, breaking people who were just trying to survive. I don't want it anymore. His voice cracked slightly. The only thing I want is to wake up and not hate myself. And the only way I can do that is by standing here with you. Clara started crying quietly in the corner. Michael was still at the window, watching the horizon like he expected Thomas Granger to come back with an army. James had fallen asleep, sitting up, exhausted by fear. We should rest, Savannah said. Court's in 2 days, and we need to be ready. But nobody slept much. Savannah kept startling awake, certain she heard horses outside. Michael kept watching shifts with Wyatt, both of them jumping at every sound. Clara's cough got worse from stress and cold. James had nightmares. The next morning, Daniel Webster showed up at the cabin on a rented horse, looking grim. We need to talk, he said, before he'd even dismounted. Granger's lawyers filed new motions this morning. They're claiming your homestead documentation is fraudulent and demanding the court investigate how you obtained it. Savannah's stomach dropped. They know about Helena. They suspect. They can't prove it yet, but they're pushing hard, and Judge Hendricks is inclined to listen. Webster tied his horse and followed them inside. I need to know, are those documents legitimate copies of what's actually in the land office files? Yes, Savannah said. Can you prove it? Not without admitting how we got them. Webster swore quietly. That's what I thought. So here's where we stand. The documents are solid, but if Granger's lawyers can create enough doubt about their authenticity, Hendricks might throw them out entirely, which means our whole case collapses. What about Wyatt's testimony? Savannah asked. That's our best shot now. If he gets up there and tells the court what his father's been doing, the intimidation, the land grabs, the corruption, it might be enough to override questions about the documents. Webster looked at Wyatt. You ready for that? Because they're going to come after you hard. Your own father's lawyers are going to try to destroy your credibility. I'm ready, Wyatt said. Good, because you're going to need to be. Webster pulled out a folder. I've been digging into Granger's past cases. Found at least 8 other homesteaders he's pushed out using the same tactics. If we can establish a pattern of behavior, show the court this isn't an isolated incident, it strengthens our argument that he's acting in bad faith. Can we get those homesteaders to testify? Savannah asked. Most of them are gone. Left the territory, went back east, disappeared. But I found 2 who are still around and willing to talk. One's a farmer named Morrison who lost his claim 5 years ago. The other's a widow named Ellen Price who's been fighting Granger in court for 3 years. Will their testimony be enough? Honestly, I don't know. Hendricks is unpredictable, but it's better than walking in with nothing. Webster stood. Court convenes at 9 tomorrow morning. Be there early. Dress as well as you can. Appearances matter to judges. And Wyatt, you need to be prepared for what your father's going to say about you. It won't be pleasant. After Webster left, Savannah pulled out the one decent dress she owned, the one her mother had worn to church, back when they still went to church. It was too big on her now, after months of not eating enough, but it would have to do. She tried to wash the worst of the stains out and hung it near the fire to dry. Wyatt watched her work. You don't have to do this alone, he said quietly. When we're in that courtroom, I'll be right there. I know. And after whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. She looked at him. What if we lose? Then we find another way. There's always another way. Not always. Sometimes there's just losing. Savannah. He crossed to her and tilted her face up. Listen to me. I've watched you keep 3 kids alive through a Montana winter with almost no resources. I've watched you stare down my father without flinching. I've watched you risk everything to fight for what's yours. You don't know how to quit. Neither do I. So whatever happens tomorrow, we're not done. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that determination and rightness would be enough. But she'd seen too much of how the world actually worked to have that kind of faith anymore. That night, she lay awake listening to her siblings breathe and Wyatt moving quietly around the cabin, keeping watch. Sometime around midnight, she got up and found him sitting by the fire. Can't sleep? He asked. Too much in my head. She sat down beside him. Tell me something true. Like what? Like why you really came here that first night. The real reason. Wyatt was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. My father had a list, he said finally. Homesteads he was planning to challenge. Yours was at the top because it's the best land. Water access, good grazing, close to the cattle trail. He sent me out to scout it, see how vulnerable you were. Report back on whether you were worth the legal fight, or if you'd just fold. But you didn't report back. No. Because I got here and saw you standing in that doorway with a rifle and 3 scared kids behind you, and I realized you were exactly the kind of person my father destroys. Strong enough to fight, but not strong enough to win. And I couldn't... His voice broke slightly. I couldn't be part of that anymore. So I came back. And I kept coming back. And somewhere along the way it stopped being about guilt and became about you. What about me? Everything about you. The way you never complain even when you're exhausted. The way you look at your siblings like they're the only thing in the world that matters. The way you stood up to my father like you were 10 feet tall instead of half-starved and terrified. He looked at her. You made me want to be better than I was. Better than my name says I should be. Savannah felt tears burning behind her eyes. I'm not special, Wyatt. I'm just stubborn. You're a lot more than stubborn. What if we lose tomorrow? What if the judge rules against us and we have to leave? Then we leave. We take the kids, we go somewhere else, and we start over. That's not what I want. I know, but wanting something doesn't mean we get it. He took her hand. My father taught me that. The frontier taught you that. We both know how this could end, but we're fighting anyway, because not fighting means letting him win, and I'm done letting him win. They sat together in silence until the fire burned down to coals and the sky started lightening in the east. Then they woke the kids, dressed in their best clothes, and loaded into the wagon for the ride to Billings. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. News had spread about the hearing. Thomas Granger's son turning against him was the kind of scandal people came out to watch. Savannah saw curious faces, hostile faces, a few that looked almost sympathetic. Ruth Mackenzie was there, standing in the back where she wouldn't be noticed. She gave Savannah a small nod. Daniel Webster met them at the entrance. Granger's here with 4 lawyers, all of them from Helena, All of them expensive. They've been talking to the judge for the past 20 minutes. Is that legal? Wyatt asked. It's not illegal, just unethical. But that's never stopped them before. Webster ushered them inside. Remember, stay calm, answer honestly, don't let them rattle you. And Wyatt, when they come after you, and they will, keep your temper. Losing your cool is exactly what they want. The courtroom was smaller than Savannah expected, with wooden benches and a judge's bench that loomed over everything. Judge Hendricks was already seated, a man in his 60s with white hair and a face that gave nothing away. Thomas Granger sat at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by his lawyers, looking confident and relaxed. He didn't even glance at Wyatt. All rise, the bailiff called. Court is now in session. Hendricks banged his gavel once. We're here for the matter of Granger versus Hale, a challenge to homestead claim designation T9-S12. Mr. Webster, you're representing the defendants? Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Sutton is representing the plaintiff? One of Granger's lawyers stood, a man with silver hair and an expensive suit. That's correct, Your Honor. Then let's proceed. Mr. Sutton, you may present your case. What followed was 2 hours of legal maneuvering that made Savannah's head spin. Sutton laid out Thomas Granger's challenge with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. The Hale claim was incomplete. Jacob Hale had died before finalizing the patent. His daughter was unqualified to continue the claim. The improvements were insufficient. The occupation was inconsistent. On and on, each argument delivered with confident precision. Then Sutton brought up the documentation. Your Honor, the defense has submitted what they claim are copies of land office records proving the claim's validity. However, we have reason to believe these documents are fraudulent. Webster shot to his feet. Objection. There's no evidence supporting that accusation. The evidence, Sutton said smoothly, is that the original documents allegedly copied were never properly filed. The land office in Helena has no record of receiving or processing the patent application referenced in these so-called copies. That's because your client made sure they disappeared, Webster shot back. Hendricks banged his gavel. Mr. Webster, that's enough. Do you have proof of Mr. Granger's involvement? Not direct proof, Your Honor, but then don't make accusations you can't support. Hendricks looked at the documents Webster had submitted. I'm inclined to exclude these unless you can authenticate them properly. Savannah felt the floor drop out from under her. Without those documents, they had nothing. Webster was arguing, citing precedents, trying to keep the evidence in play, but she could see Hendricks wasn't listening anymore. Then Wyatt stood up. Your Honor, I can authenticate them. The courtroom went dead silent. Sutton turned slowly. Thomas Granger's face went white, then red. Hendricks frowned. You're Wyatt Granger, Thomas Granger's son? I am. And you're here to testify for the defense? I am. Against your own father. Against a man who's been stealing land from honest people for 30 years. Yes, sir. The courtroom erupted. Hendricks banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. Mr. Sutton, do you object to this witness? Sutton looked at Thomas, who was gripping the table edge hard enough to make his knuckles white. We object strenuously, Your Honor. This witness is biased and unreliable. Noted, but I'm going to hear what he has to say. Mr. Granger, approach the witness stand. Wyatt walked forward and was sworn in. He sat down, and Savannah could see his hands shaking slightly before he gripped the chair arms to steady them. Webster approached him. Mr. Granger, how do you know the Hale family? I met Savannah Hale in February of this year. Her family was struggling after her parents died, and I helped them complete improvements to their homestead. Why did you help them? Because my father was planning to file a challenge on their claim, and I knew it was wrong. The Hales had met every requirement. They'd lived on that land for 3 years, made improvements, cultivated crops. They deserved to keep it. Are you aware that your father filed this challenge? I am. I found out about it after I tried to file the patent application on the Hales' behalf. Tried to file it? I filed it in Helena, gave it directly to the land office registrar, but somehow it never made it into the system. And when I asked questions, I was told by my father's people to stop asking. Sutton stood. Objection, hearsay and speculation. I'll rephrase, Webster said. Do you believe your father interfered with that filing? I know he did. He admitted it to me. The courtroom noise rose again. Hendricks gavelled for silence. He admitted it? When? The night he locked me in my room to prevent me from testifying here today. He told me he'd made sure the filing disappeared because he wasn't going to let homesteaders steal what was rightfully his. Wyatt looked directly at his father. He said a lot of things that night, about how he destroyed other claims the same way, about how the law doesn't matter if you have enough money and connections. Thomas Granger stood up so fast his chair fell over. He's lying. Mr. Granger, sit down, Hendricks barked. That boy is lying to protect a woman he's infatuated with. He's got no proof of anything he's saying. Mr. Granger, I will hold you in contempt if you don't sit down right now. Thomas sat, but the rage coming off him was almost physical. Sutton was scrambling, trying to figure out how to salvage this. The other lawyers were whispering frantically. Webster continued. Mr. Granger, are you aware of other homesteaders your father has pushed out? Yes, at least a dozen in the last 10 years. Can you name them? Morrison family, 1877. Ellen Price, ongoing since 1879. The Johnsons, the Steeles, the Cartwrights, all of them pushed out through legal challenges and intimidation. Objection, Sutton shouted. This is beyond the scope of the current case. Your Honor, Webster said calmly, we're establishing a pattern of behavior that directly relates to the plaintiff's motivations in this case. Hendricks considered. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Webster. For the next hour, Wyatt laid it all out. The strategies his father used, the lawyers on retainer, the paid-off officials, the threats, the systematic destruction of anyone who tried to make an honest living on land Thomas Granger wanted. He named names, cited specific cases, gave dates and details. And with every word, Thomas Granger's case fell apart. When Webster finally sat down, Sutton approached for cross-examination, and Savannah could see he was going for blood. Mr. Granger, how much money have you borrowed from Miss Hale? None. How much property has she promised you in exchange for your testimony? None. So you're doing all this out of the goodness of your heart? I'm doing it because it's right. Right. Sutton's voice dripped contempt. Tell me, Mr. Granger, are you romantically involved with Miss Hale? Wyatt hesitated, and Savannah's heart stopped. Answer the question, Hendricks said. Yes, Wyatt said quietly. I am. The courtroom exploded again. Sutton smiled like he'd just won. So you're in love with her, which means you'd say anything to help her case, including lying about your own father. I'm not lying. You're a lovesick young man who's throwing away his entire future for a woman you barely know. That's not credibility, Mr. Granger. That's desperation. You want to talk about desperation? Wyatt's voice rose. Let's talk about a 22-year-old woman trying to keep 3 kids alive in a Montana winter with no money and no help. Let's talk about a man who spent his whole life building something only to have a cattle baron steal it because he had better lawyers. That's desperation, Mr. Sutton. What I am is just tired of watching it happen. Your Honor, Sutton said, I move to strike this witness's entire testimony as unreliable. But Hendricks was looking at Wyatt with something that might have been respect. Motion denied. I found the witness credible. But, Your Honor, I said motion denied. Hendricks looked at the lawyers. Anything else? Webster stood. We'd like to call Ellen Price to the stand. Ellen Price was a woman in her 50s, weathered and hard-eyed, who told a story that echoed Savannah's almost exactly. Thomas Granger had challenged her claim, made her life hell for 3 years. She'd only survived because she'd had money saved from before the frontier, enough to hire lawyers and fight back. But it had nearly broken her. Then Morrison testified. Then 2 other homesteaders Webster had found who'd heard about the case and come to Billings to tell their stories. By the time they were done, the sun was setting, and Thomas Granger looked like he'd aged 10 years. His lawyers were out of arguments. The courtroom was packed with people who'd come to watch a land dispute and found themselves witnessing something bigger. Finally, Hendricks called for closing arguments. Sutton did his best, arguing law and procedure and the importance of respecting established property rights. But even he seemed to know it was over. Webster kept it simple. Your Honor, this case isn't complicated. It's about whether a family that's done everything right gets to keep what they've earned, or whether a rich man gets to take it because he wants it. That's all it's ever been about. And I trust this court to make the right decision. Hendricks was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at Thomas Granger. Mr. Granger, I've known you for 20 years. I've ruled in your favor more times than I can count. But I have to tell you, what I heard today sickens me. If even half of what your son testified to is true, you've been abusing the legal system to steal from people who can't fight back. And I won't be part of it anymore. Your Honor, Thomas started. I'm not finished. I'm ruling in favor of the defendants. The Hale claim is valid and will be processed for final patent. Your challenge is dismissed. And Mr. Granger, if you ever bring another homestead challenge in my courtroom, I'm going to scrutinize it so hard you'll wish you'd never filed it. We're done here. The gavel came down, and for a moment nobody moved. Then the courtroom erupted in cheers, and Savannah found herself surrounded by Michael, Clara, and James, all of them crying and holding on to her. Webster was shaking Wyatt's hand. Ruth Mackenzie was crying in the back. Ellen Price was smiling for the first time in probably 3 years. And Thomas Granger walked out of the courthouse without looking at anyone, his lawyers trailing behind him like mourners at a funeral. Savannah pushed through the crowd to get to Wyatt. He caught her and lifted her off the ground, and she was crying and laughing and couldn't tell which was which anymore. We won, she kept saying. We actually won. You won, Wyatt corrected. You fought, and you won. We fought, all of us. She pulled back to look at him. What happens now? Now? He smiled. Now we go home. They didn't go home right away. There were papers to sign, fees to pay, documentation to finalize. Daniel Webster walked them through every step, making sure nothing could be challenged later. The patent would be official within 6 weeks, he said. Until then, they needed to keep improving the property, keep living there, keep proving they weren't going anywhere. You understand what you did today, right? Webster said as they prepared to leave Billings. You didn't just win a land case, you embarrassed one of the most powerful men in the territory. He's not going to forget that. Let him remember, Wyatt said. Maybe it'll make him think twice before he tries it again. Or maybe it'll make him more dangerous. Webster looked at Savannah. Watch your back, both of you. They took the warning seriously, but it was hard to feel afraid when they were riding home with the knowledge that the home was actually theirs now. Michael couldn't stop grinning. Clara hummed the whole way. James fell asleep in Savannah's lap, finally able to rest without fear. When they crested the ridge and saw the cabin in the valley below, Savannah felt something break open inside her chest. It looked the same as it always had, small, worn, patched together. But it was theirs. Legally, officially, permanently theirs. You all right? Wyatt asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They rode down into the valley as the sun set behind the mountains, painting everything gold and red. That night, they celebrated with the last of the supplies Wyatt had brought weeks ago. It wasn't much, some bacon, beans, coffee, but it felt like a feast. Michael told the story of the trial 3 times, each version getting more dramatic. Clara made them all laugh by imitating the judge's stern face. James declared that when he grew up, he was going to be a lawyer so he could win cases just like they did. Later, after the kids were asleep, Savannah and Wyatt sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The spring air was still cold, but there was a softness to it now that hadn't been there in winter, a promise of something better coming. What are you thinking about? Wyatt asked. Everything. Nothing. I don't know. She leaned against him. I keep waiting for something else to go wrong. Like this can't be real. It's real. Your father's going to come after us again. You know that, right? He's not the kind of man who accepts losing. Probably, but we beat him once. We can do it again. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. My mother came to see me before we left Billings. Savannah sat up. What did she say? That I'd made my choice, and she hoped I could live with it. That my father would never forgive me, and I shouldn't expect him to. That I was throwing away everything he'd built for me. He looked at his hands. She wasn't wrong about any of it. Do you regret it? No, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Savannah took his hand. You gave up a lot for us. For me. I didn't give up anything worth keeping. Money I didn't earn, a name that came with too much blood on it, a future built on other people's suffering. He turned to face her. You know what I got instead? A reason to get up in the morning that isn't about taking from someone else. That's worth more than anything my father could have given me. What happens now? Between us, I mean. Wyatt smiled slightly. I was hoping you'd tell me. I don't know how this works. I've never. She stopped, frustrated with herself. I've spent 3 years just trying to survive. I don't know how to think past tomorrow. Then don't. We'll figure it out as we go. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan I've got. They sat in silence for a while, and Savannah tried to imagine what came next. The homestead was secure, but there was still so much work to do. Crops to plant, fences to finish, animals to acquire. Michael needed schooling. Clara's cough needed proper medicine. James needed shoes that actually fit. And underneath all of it was the question of what exactly Wyatt was to them now. Partner, helper, something more. Stay, she said quietly. What? Stay here. With us. Help us build this into something real. She looked at him. Not because we need you, though we do, but because I want you here. Because when I think about the future now, you're in it. Wyatt's expression did something complicated. Savannah, are you asking me to... I'm asking you to stay. Everything else we'll figure out when we get there. He kissed her then, gentle and certain, and when they pulled apart, he was smiling. I'll stay. The next few weeks were the hardest work Savannah had ever done, and that was saying something. They plowed the fields from dawn until dark, getting the soil ready for spring planting. Wyatt taught Michael how to handle a plow team, how to read the land, how to plan crop rotation. They fixed the fences, reinforced the barn, dug out a proper root cellar. Every day brought new aches and new exhaustion, but also progress that was visible and real. Ruth Mackenzie came by one afternoon with a wagon load of seed stock and supplies. Consider it an investment, she said when Savannah tried to figure out how to pay her. You won a fight I couldn't win. Least I can do is help you keep what you fought for. I can't just take... You can, and you will. Besides, I'm not being entirely selfless. You're going to need supplies from town, and I happen to own a feed store. Consider this the start of a profitable business relationship. Other homesteaders started coming around too. People who'd heard about the trial, who'd been fighting their own battles against cattle barons and land speculators, who saw what the Hales had done and found hope in it. Some brought food, others brought tools or labor, or just good wishes. A few asked for advice on their own legal troubles, and Savannah found herself giving what help she could, even though she barely understood how they'd won their own case. You're becoming famous, Wyatt said one evening after the third group of visitors had left. I'm not famous. I just got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought back when everyone expected you to fold. People remember that. Michael came running up from the south field, out of breath. Riders coming. A lot of them. Savannah's stomach clenched. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the porch, Wyatt beside her. But when the riders came into view, she saw it wasn't Thomas Granger's men. It was Caroline Granger, alone, on a fine gray mare. She rode up to the cabin and dismounted with the practiced ease of someone who'd grown up on horseback. She looked older than she had at the trial, or maybe just more tired. Mrs. Granger, Savannah said carefully. Miss Hale, may I speak with my son? Wyatt stepped forward. Mother. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Savannah could see years of complicated history passing between them. Walk with me, Caroline said. Wyatt glanced at Savannah, who nodded. They walked toward the creek, out of earshot. Savannah watched them go, trying not to imagine the worst. They were gone for almost an hour. When they came back, Caroline's eyes were red, but her face was composed. She nodded once to Savannah, mounted her horse, and rode away without another word. What happened? Savannah asked when Wyatt returned to the porch. She came to say goodbye. Goodbye? She's leaving my father, taking my sisters and moving to her family's property in Colorado. She said she's spent 30 years watching him destroy people, and she can't do it anymore. He sat down heavily. She said what I did in court, standing up to him, made her realize she'd been a coward, that she'd let him become what he is because it was easier than fighting him. What did you say? I said she wasn't a coward, that survival sometimes looks like compliance, that I understood why she stayed. He looked at Savannah. Then she gave me this. He held out a folded document. Savannah opened it carefully. It was a deed transfer for 200 acres of grazing land adjacent to their homestead, land that had been in Caroline's name, not Thomas's. She's giving us land? She said it's an apology. For not helping sooner. For raising me in a house where taking from others was considered normal. Wyatt's voice was rough. She said she was proud of me. First time she's ever said that. Savannah folded the deed carefully and set it aside. Then she wrapped her arms around Wyatt and held him while he shook with emotion he'd been holding in too long. That night, Michael asked the question Savannah had been avoiding. Is Wyatt staying forever? They were sitting around the fire after dinner. Clara and James had fallen asleep, sprawled across the bed in the tangle-limbed way children sleep when they finally feel safe. I hope so, Savannah said. Are you going to get married, Michael? It's a fair question, Wyatt said. He looked at Savannah. Is it? She felt her face heat. We haven't talked about it. Maybe we should. Michael grinned and suddenly found a reason to check on the horses outside, leaving them alone except for the sleeping kids. That wasn't subtle, Savannah said. No, it wasn't. Wyatt moved closer. But he's not wrong to ask. I've been here almost 2 months now. People are talking, and I don't want there to be any confusion about what my intentions are. What are your intentions? I want to marry you. I want to help you raise those kids. I want to build this homestead into something that lasts. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life and know that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He took her hands. That clear enough? Savannah's throat was tight. You're sure? Because once you do this, there's no going back to your old life. You'll be a homesteader's husband, not a cattle baron's son. I'm already a homesteader. Have been since the first day I picked up a hammer to fix your door. He smiled. So what do you say, Savannah Hale? Will you marry me? She thought about everything they'd been through, the fear and fighting, the hunger and cold, the desperate scramble to survive. She thought about standing in a courtroom and watching Wyatt choose her over everything he'd ever known. She thought about the future, still uncertain, still hard, but no longer hopeless. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Ruth Mackenzie's feed store, because the church and Crossroads charged fees they couldn't afford, and Ruth offered the space for free. Daniel Webster stood as witness. Ellen Price came with a cake. A dozen other homesteaders showed up to celebrate, people who saw the marriage as more than just two individuals making a commitment, but as proof that the small could stand against the powerful and win. Michael walked Savannah down the makeshift aisle. Clara scattered wildflowers. James held the rings with such seriousness that several people had to hide smiles. And when the traveling preacher asked if Wyatt took Savannah to be his wife, his "I do" was steady and sure. They spent their wedding night in the cabin, all 5 of them, because there was nowhere else to go and no money for anything fancy. But Savannah didn't care. She lay next to Wyatt in the dark and listened to her siblings, their siblings now, breathing softly, and felt something she hadn't felt since before her parents died. Peace. Spring turned to summer, and the homestead began to thrive in ways Savannah had only imagined during the desperate winter months. The crops came in better than expected. The cattle Wyatt had moved onto their expanded grazing land were healthy and multiplying. They built a new room onto the cabin, then another, until the place started looking less like a desperate shelter and more like an actual home. Michael shot up 3 inches and started looking less like a scared boy and more like a young man with confidence and purpose. Clara's cough finally cleared up with proper medicine and regular meals. James started school in Crossroads, riding in twice a week with children from other homesteads. And Savannah learned what it felt like to not be alone. It wasn't always easy. Wyatt had moments where he'd go quiet, and she knew he was thinking about his family, about the father who wouldn't speak to him and the life he'd left behind. She had moments where the old fear would come back, the certainty that everything they'd built could be taken away. They argued sometimes, usually about stupid things like how to stack firewood or whether to plant corn or wheat in the south field. But they learned to fight fair, to apologize when they were wrong, to choose each other even when it was hard. In August, Thomas Granger sold his ranch. The news spread through the valley like wildfire. The great cattle empire that had dominated the territory for 30 years was being broken up and sold in pieces to smaller ranchers and homesteaders. Thomas himself had moved to Helena, people said. His remaining children had scattered to other territories. The era of the Granger dominance was over. How do you feel about it? Savannah asked Wyatt when they heard. Sad, mostly. Not for him. He made his choices. But for what it could have been if he'd been different. If he'd seen people as something other than obstacles. Wyatt looked out at their fields. I used to think power was about how much you could control, how much you could take and keep. Now I know that's just fear dressed up as strength. What's real strength, then? Building something that doesn't require crushing someone else to exist, choosing to be decent when it would be easier not to be, standing up even when you're terrified. He looked at her. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You already knew it. You just needed a reason to act on it. In October, they held a harvest celebration. Other homesteaders came with their families and they filled the valley with music and food and the kind of joy that comes from surviving something hard together. Michael played fiddle. When had he learned that? And couples danced in the firelight. Children ran wild until they collapsed from exhaustion. Old-timers told stories about the early days of the territory, back when everything was possible and nothing was certain. Ruth Mackenzie pulled Savannah aside at one point. You know what you did, don't you? What do you mean? You changed things, not just for yourself, but for all of us. People see what you fought for and they think maybe they can fight too. Maybe they don't have to accept being pushed around by whoever has the most money or the most guns. I just wanted to keep my home. And in keeping it, you showed everyone else how to keep theirs. Ruth smiled. That matters, Savannah, more than you know. As winter approached again, Savannah found herself standing in the same spot where she'd stood a year ago, watching snow begin to fall and wondering if they'd survive it. But everything was different now. The cabin was warm and solid. The cellar was full of food. They had livestock, savings, a plan for the future, and she wasn't alone anymore. Wyatt came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? How different everything is. How much has changed? For the better? Definitely for the better. She leaned back against him. Do you ever regret it? Giving up everything you had? Every day, he said, and when she tensed, he turned her to face him. I regret that I didn't do it sooner, that I wasted so many years being what my father wanted instead of who I actually was. But giving up the money and the name and the legacy built on other people's misery, I've never regretted that for a second. Even when we're eating beans for the fourth night in a row. Especially then, because those beans are ours. We earned them honestly, and nobody can take them away from us. That night at dinner, James asked a question that made everyone go quiet. Are we rich now? Michael laughed. We're not rich, Jamie, or we're just not poor anymore. What's the difference? Rich people don't have to work, Claire explained with the wisdom of someone who'd spent too much time listening to adults talk. We work all the time. But we have enough, Savannah said. We have food and shelter and each other. That's a kind of richness that matters more than money. Thomas Granger had money, Wyatt added. He had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, but he wasn't rich. He was empty. Because money can't fill the places where decency and compassion are supposed to live. So being rich is being happy, James asked. Being rich is having something worth protecting that doesn't require hurting other people to keep, Savannah said. She looked around the table at her family, brothers and sister and husband, all of them fed and safe and together. And by that measure, were the richest people in Montana. In December, Caroline Granger sent a letter from Colorado. It was addressed to both of them, and Savannah read it aloud by firelight while Wyatt listened with his jaw tight. The letter was brief. Caroline had settled with her daughters on her family's old ranch. They were doing well. The girls were happy to be away from their father's shadow. She hoped Wyatt was happy too. She was proud of the choice he'd made, even if it had cost her her marriage, and she wanted him to know that he was welcome to visit if he ever wanted to. Are you going to write back? Savannah asked. Eventually, when I figure out what to say. Wyatt stared at the letter. Part of me wants to be angry at her for not leaving sooner. For raising me in that house, around that man, without teaching me that there was another way to live. But she did the best she could with what she had, and in the end she found the courage to leave. That counts for something. You could go see her, next spring maybe. Take Michael, he'd love to see real mountains. Would you come? If you want me to. I want you to. He folded the letter carefully. I want my sisters to meet you. Want them to see what a strong woman actually looks like. Savannah felt tears prick her eyes. I'm not that strong. Yes, you are. You just don't see it because you're too busy being it. On Christmas Eve, they sat around the fire and Michael asked Savannah to tell the story again. The whole story, from the beginning. "You've heard it a dozen times," she protested. "Tell it anyway," Clara said. "Please?" So Savannah told them about the desperate winter when she thought they'd lose everything. About the stranger who rode through a storm and offered help instead of pity. About stealing documents from a government building and facing down a cattle baron in court. About choosing to fight when everyone said they should run. James fell asleep halfway through, but Michael and Clara listened raptly, even though they'd lived through most of it themselves. And when Savannah got to the end, to the moment when Judge Hendricks ruled in their favor, Michael whispered, "Tell the last part again, the part about going home." So she did. She told them about walking out of that courthouse knowing the land was truly theirs, about the feeling of victory mixed with exhaustion, mixed with disbelief, about Wyatt lifting her off the ground and all of them crying and laughing at once. "And then," James mumbled, half asleep. "And then we came home," Savannah said softly. "And we built something worth keeping." Years passed the way years do on the frontier, slowly and quickly at the same time, marked by seasons and work and small victories. Michael grew into a young man who could manage the whole operation himself when needed. Clara became known throughout the valley for her healing skills, having apprenticed with a doctor in Billings. James went to school and talked about becoming a lawyer like Daniel Webster. And Savannah and Wyatt built a life that neither of them had imagined possible in those desperate early days. They had children of their own, 2 daughters and a son who grew up knowing that the land they lived on had been fought for and won. Who understood that sometimes the right thing to do was the hardest thing. Who learned from both their parents that real strength wasn't about power over others, but about standing up when it would be easier to stay down. On their 10th anniversary, Wyatt brought Savannah to the ridge overlooking the valley where they'd built their life. "Remember the first time I saw this place?" he asked. "You were scouting it for your father." "I was. I came up here and looked down at that little cabin and thought about how easy it would be to take this land. How vulnerable you were. How quickly my father could destroy everything you were trying to build." He took her hand. "And then I actually met you, and I realized the only thing that was vulnerable was my entire understanding of what mattered. We were pretty pathetic that first winter. You were magnificent. You just didn't know it yet." They stood together watching the sun set over their valley, their homestead that had grown into a working ranch, their fields golden with wheat, their children playing in the distance, their life that they'd built from nothing but stubbornness and hope. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd never come here?" Savannah asked. "If you'd done what your father wanted and reported that we were vulnerable?" "Every day. And every day I'm grateful I didn't." He pulled her close. "You want to know the truth? I didn't save you. You saved me. You showed me what it looked like to have something worth fighting for, to be someone worth respecting." "We saved each other," Savannah said. "That's how it works." When word came that Thomas Granger had died alone in Helena, Wyatt didn't go to the funeral, but he did stand at their fence line looking north toward where the old Granger ranch used to be, and Savannah knew he was thinking about what his father could have been if he'd made different choices. "You're nothing like him," she said quietly. "I could have been, if you hadn't shown me another way. You would have found it eventually. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find it alone." Their oldest daughter asked once why they'd fought so hard for the land when they could have just left and started over somewhere easier. Savannah thought about it for a long time before answering. "Because some things are worth fighting for," she said finally. "Not because they're easy or convenient, but because they represent something bigger than themselves. This land represents every homesteader who tried to build something honest, every family that chose to stand up instead of being pushed down. Your father and I could have walked away, but walking away would have meant letting the bullies win, and we decided we'd rather bleed than let that happen." "Was it worth it?" Savannah looked around at everything they'd built, the expanded homestead, the stable full of horses, the fields that fed not just their family, but sold surplus to other settlements. She looked at her children, healthy and educated and strong. She looked at Wyatt, gray at the temples now, but still working every day to make their land into something worth passing on. "Yes," she said, "it was worth every scar." On a spring morning, 30 years after that desperate winter, when everything almost fell apart, Savannah stood on the porch of the house they'd built. Not the original cabin, which had been absorbed into a much larger structure over the years, and watched the sun rise over their valley. Michael ran the ranch now, with his own family living in a house they'd built on the south property. Clara had opened a medical practice in Billings but came home often. James had indeed become a lawyer and was making a name for himself defending homesteaders' rights across the territory. The land was fully theirs now, had been for decades. The patent was framed on the wall inside, a reminder of what they'd fought for and won. Other families had followed their example, filing claims and standing up to cattle barons and land speculators, until the valley was full of small homesteads instead of massive ranches. The frontier had changed, or maybe they'd changed it, one stubborn fight at a time. Wyatt came out to join her, moving a little slower these days, but still solid, still here. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." "Good things or bad things?" "Good things. Mostly." She leaned against him, fitting into the space beside him that had become as familiar as breathing. "I was thinking about that first winter, how scared I was, how certain I was that we were going to lose everything. We almost did, but we didn't, because you showed up in a storm and decided to help instead of taking advantage. Best decision I ever made." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play in the distance. Michael's kids, Clara's kids, all of them growing up on land that their grandparents had bled to keep. "You know what I think about?" Wyatt said after a while. "I think about all the people who didn't make it, the homesteaders who lost their claims to men like my father, the families who gave up and went back east, the ones who fought and lost and disappeared." He was quiet for a moment. "We were lucky, but we were also stubborn enough to keep fighting when luck ran out. Is there a difference?" "Yeah, luck is random. Stubbornness is a choice. And choosing to fight, even when you're terrified, even when the odds are impossible, that's the thing that actually changes the world." Savannah thought about Judge Hendricks ruling in their favor, about Ruth Mackenzie helping them steal documents, about Caroline Granger finding the courage to leave her husband, about a territorial judge getting angry enough at corruption to actually do something about it, about all the small moments of people choosing to be decent when it would have been easier not to be. "We didn't change the world," she said. "We just changed our little corner of it. That's how the world changes. One corner at a time. One family deciding they won't be pushed around. One person standing up when everyone else is sitting down." He kissed the top of her head. "You started something, Savannah, whether you meant to or not." She didn't know about that. All she knew was that they'd survived something that should have destroyed them, that they'd built something that would outlast them, that 3 scared kids who'd almost lost everything had grown into adults who knew their worth and wouldn't let anyone take it away. That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner, children and grandchildren filling the house with noise and life, and the kind of chaos that comes from being well loved. And as Savannah watched them all laughing and arguing and reaching for seconds, she realized that this was the thing they'd really been fighting for all along. Not the land, though the land mattered. Not the legal victory, though that had been essential. But this. Family. Home. The knowledge that they'd stood their ground and won the right to exist on their own terms, that they'd looked at a system designed to crush them and said, "No, we're staying," that they'd chosen each other over everything else and built something that no cattle baron or corrupt official could take away. Later, when everyone had gone home or to bed, and it was just Savannah and Wyatt again, they sat on the porch like they'd done thousands of times before. "No regrets?" Savannah asked. "About what?" "Any of it. All of it." Wyatt took her hand, the gesture so familiar now that she barely noticed it except when she stopped to appreciate how natural it had become. "My only regret is that I didn't meet you sooner, that I wasted time being someone I'm not." He looked at her. "But everything that came after, every hard day, every fight, every moment of terror that we might lose everything, I wouldn't change any of it, because it made us into this." "Into what?" "Into proof that the small can beat the powerful, that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard, that love and stubbornness can build something that actually lasts." He smiled. "We're not perfect, Savannah. We never were. But we're real, and we fought for each other. And that turned out to be enough." She kissed him then, soft and certain, and thought about everything they'd survived together. The desperate winter and the impossible courtroom battle, the years of hard work and harder choices, the moments of doubt and fear and exhaustion that could have broken them but somehow made them stronger instead. They'd won. Not because they were smarter or luckier or more deserving than anyone else, but because when the moment came to fight or flee, they'd chosen to fight. Because when a rich man with all the power in the world tried to take what was theirs, they'd looked him in the eye and said no. Because a cattle baron's son had decided that protecting something good mattered more than preserving something broken. And because at the end of the day, the frontier didn't belong to whoever was strongest or most ruthless. It belonged to whoever refused to give up. Years from now, when their grandchildren told the story, they'd probably make it sound easier than it was. They'd smooth over the fear and the hunger and the desperate uncertainty. They'd turn it into legend instead of the messy, terrifying, beautiful truth. But Savannah would know. Wyatt would know. And everyone who'd fought their own version of this same battle would know. That winning wasn't about being perfect. It was about being stubborn enough to keep standing when everything told you to fall. About choosing decency when cruelty would be easier. About building something worth protecting and then protecting it with everything you had. They sat together on the porch until the stars came out. Two people who'd beaten impossible odds through nothing more complicated than refusing to quit. And when they finally went inside to the home they'd fought for and won, Savannah looked back one last time at the valley spreading out below them in the darkness. Their valley. Their home. Their life that they'd built from nothing but hope and stubbornness, and the simple, radical choice to believe they deserved something better. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference.